people forget, man, the first wave of free agency isn't in the middle of March. It's when teams just start cutting these cap casualties, right? And that's where I think it's going to be the most interesting to talk about for the Cleveland Browns, because I don't think the Browns this year are going to be huge day one free agency spenders, right? If you're expecting the Browns to make a play to sign like Devontae Adams or any of the top wide receivers, I don't think that's really likely for a multitude of reasons. The main thing I don't really think is likely, especially for the Browns, is the only area you could justify on this roster is in spending money is at wide receiving and tight end, right? But those are the two areas where the Browns are cutting salary the most, right? Like they're probably going to get rid of Jarvis Landry in that $15 million contract that he has. They're probably going to get rid of Austin Hooper. And I understand those are expensive contracts. You feel like you're overpaying, but I got news for the Cleveland Browns. Like, you're going to have to overpay to get anybody this year, right? You think you're going to sign somebody to this roster at the wide receiving position, you're going to have to overpay, because the only two things that can get wide receivers especially, but, just smart football players to take less money is if they're going to a situation that they're really confident in. And that usually requires a head coach that they're confident in and a quarterback that they're confident in. And I don't think that's how people feel around the league about Kevin Stefanski and Baker Mayfield. And whatever the reality is, to people like me and you when it comes to that Odell Beckham situation, the truth around the league, right? How players in the NFL, how players even in the Cleveland Browns locker room feels about it, it's going to make it a bad look for the Cleveland Browns, right? This to a lot of wide receivers around the league that are going to be free agents or available. The Cleveland Browns situation looks like a mess for their position. I don't blame them for feeling that way, because all you see is Odell not play well here, play well somewhere else. And Odell won the Super Bowl, right? So then all of a sudden that became like a big story, and it became about how bad the Browns were, because the Browns did not have a good season either. And it just kind of made that whole offensive situation look like a complete dumpster fire. And that's a terrible look to free agents. So I don't think they're going to be able to sign big name free agents without overpaying. They don't want to keep the overpaid wide receivers that they already have, which I don't know why not at this point, because $15 million, you might have to pay that for Allen Robinson, who is terrible. But we'll see what they do with those contracts, but it just doesn't seem like they're going to do that. So when your team is not looking at day one in free agency, there is a secondary market of players that often gets talked about less than day one of free agency guys, and that is the cap casualty guys, right? The veterans that get cut and need a new home. And if you sign them, I think you get some like picks in the future too. It's an old Ray Farmer trick right now. Ray Farmer tricks, not really a good association there for a lot of Browns fans, because Ray Farmer was excruciatingly terrible at drafting players, but he was good at getting picks. This is one of the ways he did it. I mean, it was one of those things where like they signed Dwayne Bowe just to get like a third round pick or something like that. Weird stuff has happened with the Browns over the years, but these are the players that I feel like could be cap casualties on their current teams that the Browns could take advantage and sign for less than day one of free agency money. First guy here is Frank Clark. Browns need pass rushers, especially if they cannot get Jadeveon Clowney to re-sign with them. Even if they do, you would like to add some depth here. Frank Clark is a perfect reclamation project for this team, right? Nothing reclamates a defensive end like playing across from Myles Garrett, right? Like it just is helpful. And Frank Clark is a guy I feel like could benefit from that. I feel like Frank Clark is the perfect candidate for the Browns to go after if you can't, right? If you can't keep Jadeveon Clowney. I think Jadeveon Clowney is your number one priority. But if you can't get him, Frank Clark, that would make some sense. And again, defensively, when it comes to free agents, the Browns aren't going to have the same issues that they're going to have on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, people around the league want to play with Myles Garrett. That just is the truth. People want to play with Myles Garrett. So especially if you're on the defensive line, there will be no lacking of suitors to come play with him, especially if you look at what Myles playing across from Myles Garrett has done for Jadeveon Clowney's career, right? Usually the guy across from Myles has pretty good numbers. It's because Myles Garrett commands a ton of attention. Next guy in that same kind of mode, D Ford from the 49ers, two former Chiefs here. He might get cut. Again, he's another guy that you could go to, high potential. He's had a couple of years in a row, but you can rejuvenate yourself playing next to Myles Garrett. Again, Jadeveon is somebody I want to keep on this team, but I also am going to be realistic on the odds of him being on this team next year just because he is getting older. The money might be huge for him. Browns aren't going to be willing to spend huge money for Jadeveon Clowney at 29, especially when they're unsure where they're at in their current build of this team. And then also, there's a plethora of other options available that would not hesitate to come play next to Myles Garrett to rejuvenate their career. And I mean, just looking at the guys who could be cut, there's Frank Clark and D Ford. There's a bunch of guys in free agency that are around that same vein. So yeah, the Browns are going to have plenty of options if they cannot keep Jadeveon Clowney to replace that. So I think that's not something that they have to lose sleep about, right? What's going to be the other defensive end position? I think they have options there. The next guy that I think could be an interesting free agent for the Browns to look at if he does get cut, and it does look like he's going to get cut, is Carson Wentz. Now, I want to bring him in to start immediately. But you can't deny that Carson Wentz would be a upgrade from Case Keenum as a backup quarterback, right? This is more of protecting yourself from the Baker Mayfield things that could go bad, right? If he gets hurt in the first 4 weeks of the season, if he gets injured, if he just plays awful, any of the things that have and can go wrong with Baker Mayfield, you want to have a backup plan for, right? And Carson Wentz would be a pretty good backup plan. I don't know. It's Carson Wentz. Look, I'm not thinking you're going to the Super Bowl if you make Carson Wentz the backup quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. But, you would have some hope, right? If Baker comes out and stinks for the start of 2022 and you go with Carson Wentz, at least for that week, you would have some hope that, hey, maybe this could work out. With Carson Wentz, he might give you that hope for a few weeks. Now, it's going to come crashing down at some point, but Carson Wentz is a lot more likely that if he needs to for like 10 weeks, he can hold down the ship and get this team where they need to be, more than like Case Keenum or Nick Mullins. You know what I mean? I know there's some Case Keenum and Nick Mullins fans, but let's be realistic here. There's a world of difference between the ability of Carson Wentz and Case Keenum and Nick Mullins. So that might be an option they can pursue, right? Carson Wentz is kind of run out of opportunities to start again. He's at that point to where he's been on so many different opportunities, different coaching staffs, and it's all kind of ended the same for him, right? He had Doug Peterson, that kind of flamed out with him, got him fired. They hired a new guy. That didn't work out with him. He got traded, and immediately after 1 year, Frank Reich is pretty much out on Carson Wentz, which means nobody's going to sign this dude to start unless they're a truly bad team. So he's going to be in that backup market, and he's probably the best backup option available. I mean, we're talking about Marcus Mariota. Jameis Winston's probably a close to Carson Wentz. They're probably the same kind of deal there. And then Teddy Bridgewater, you know what I mean? Mitchell Trubisky, Carson Wentz would probably be the best backup option. And he's a guy who's familiar with the kind of system that Kevin Stefanski wants to run, the Shanahan style stuff. That's what Carson Wentz supposedly does well. But again, Carson Wentz can play awful football at times. And he's a turnover heavy guy. Now, that's just going to be the case with any quarterback that's kind of good, that's a free agent, right? Him and Jameis, they're both kind of good, but they both turn the ball over a ridiculous amount. And Baker Mayfield is similar to that, where, he's kind of good, but he turns the ball over all the time. So I don't know what that's going to do for Kevin Stefanski's heart rate, because he hates turnovers, but hey, it is the best option when you look at the backups, unless you want to rock it out with sleepy Teddy Bridgewater. Like, we could do that. But that's probably the best like free agent guy that's going to get cut from his team that you could look at. The next guy, OJ Howard. I like OJ Howard. I've liked OJ Howard since he's been in the draft. I understand he's had a very, very underwhelming NFL career, but the Browns are in a position here to where if they cannot get David Njoku back, they're going to have a crisis in the tight end room. Harrison Bryant's probably going to have to start. So you're just going to want to get bodies here. You're going to want to get guys who have some potential here. OJ Howard has a ton of potential. I mean, this was a first-round pick. I think he was in the top 15 in his draft, right? He was a huge prospect coming out the University of Alabama. His NFL career has not gone the way you would think it has. It's been derailed by a couple of things. The Gronk unretiring, Brady coming back. Then they drafted like Cameron Brate. Like, he hasn't been put in great situations, but there's some potential there with OJ Howard. And look, as much as the Browns like to run these 3 tight end fronts, right? This 11 personnel or 12 personnel, whatever you want to call it. OJ Howard, his athletic ability would be something that you can add there. He's also he's not been great at pass blocking, but he has had flashes of being a decent pass blocker. So there's potential there. And that's what I would say is an interesting prospect for him. The last guy is Blake Jarwin, tight end from the Cowboys. This is if you do sign David Njoku, right? Let's say you get David Njoku, you extend him or whatever, you figure it out with David. You have Harrison Bryant and you need a third tight end. Blake Jarwin, right? Pay him $5 million for 2 years or 3 years, how long he need to. And he will be a really, really good pass blocking and run blocking tight end for you. So that would make a ton of sense. So those are my 5 guys, if they get cut, that the Browns might be interested in. Frank Clark, D Ford, Carson Wentz, OJ Howard, Blake Jarwin. Let me know if there's anybody on the rosters of other NFL teams that you're keeping an eye out for to see if they get cut because you think they could help the Cleveland Browns. Let me know in the comment section down below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.